Good morning. It is 9:37 on June 24th. And I'd like to welcome you to the Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting of the Sunshine Coast Regional District. And I'd like to acknowledge that we are coming to you from the unceded traditional territory of the Shuswap and Squamish Nations. So we have an amended agenda in front of us. The additions are a report for item number 10 and an additional clause to the in-camera agenda. Are there any other additions or deletions? All right, seeing none, I'd look for a motion to adopt the agenda as amended. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. Then I'd look for a motion to receive all the reports and communications. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. All right, let's move on to item number 1. Item number 1 is our regular budget project status report. And as we've done in the past, we will go page by page. Yeah, I know there's background noise. It's done now. I printed out my revised agenda. All right, so project status report. You'll note in the report itself, it talks about the fact that some of the projects have been moved to the end of the report. Those are as a result of some of the decisions that we've made previously in some of the meetings. So I'll move on to page 1, page 1 of the report, which is page 2. This would be items numbers 1 through 8. Any questions on any of those? Director Lee.
Yes, on line 25, all of the benefits, when are they effective? In other words, when do we start paying for those benefits for the fire departments?
Staff, do we know?
Thanks for the question, Chair. I guess as the incoming GM responsible for protective services, I can answer the question by saying I don't have that information. Thanks.
Thank you. And it looks like he's making a note, so he'll go find out for us. Director Todd.
Where Jerry would have been super handy, but he's on holiday.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Director Ties.
I just had to have a little bit of a chuckle on line item 19. Apparently, the benefits for volunteer firefighters are awaiting engineers' drawings. That was.
Okay. Before we go further, I noticed during the agenda review, and sorry to staff, I forgot this piece. During agenda review, we noticed that I pointed out basically there's a lot of items that are not started. And our CAO, McKinley, is going to speak to that.
Thank you, Chair. And probably I'm speaking to probably a little bit more than just the not started category. As noted in the actual cover page for the budget project status report, this is a working document and staff are continuing to look at ways to improve it. And one of the things that we recognize is something that's not started, or it's 25% done or 50% done or 75% done. There's not always a lot of context around that in terms of, there might be something in the column, but not necessarily, just because something is only 25% done doesn't necessarily mean it's going poorly. And I do note that in general, some of the things that aren't started have not been started because of internal capacity and workload issues. Sometimes it's because of external forces that we can't control, and sometimes we've simply been hammered with things that we didn't anticipate that are a higher priority that we're unable to get started right away because of our energies have been directed elsewhere. What I would note is that we continue to look at ways to improve this report and the context around
Can I just cut in? Sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Your audio has gone to sound like you're in the bottom of an aquarium somewhere. I don't know if that's a hardware issue or just try that again.
Maybe
CAO.
just be a little closer to your
Okay, I
device.
apologize. Is this here is other than this looking ridiculous? Does this sound better?
Yes.
I apologize to anyone that has to watch my face this close to the screen. So we continue to look for ways to add value to this report, especially around the context of some of the items. And I don't know which parts were super muffled. So in some cases, 25% done is actually on schedule or good. In other cases, it might not be. Coming out of the strategic plan review sessions, we are going to be looking very closely at this budget project status report, the timelines around it, all of the items, and trying to link it to staff capacity. We'll also be looking at ways to provide additional context so it's easier to understand how we feel about the status of the various projects that are listed.
Thank you.
And now I will take my face back from the screen. Sorry about the audio.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Yes, I believe that probably our CAO, McKinley, was referring to the estimated completion date as well. I notice it's missing in most projects, which is not so good. We don't necessarily know when they're going to be done. So it's hard for us to answer questions. So I'm thinking that those will be added soon as well. That's a question.
Yes. You got a thumbs up on that one.
Yeah, we're trying.
All right. Do you see the comment in the chat on this one? The suggestion is potentially color code them, indicating if they're, that's a lot of work, I understand. So it's just an idea at this point. All right, any further questions or comments on page 1, items 1 through 28? Seeing no further on that, let's move to the second page. This is items 29 through 43. Director Toth.
Sorry, Chair, I can't find the exact item number here, but given that it's a lot of solid waste and landfills, I just wanted to ask about where we're at with the power supply system repair for the Seashell landfill. Oh, here we go. It says not started. Given the urgency of that, I just wonder, is that correct? And do we have any sort of estimated timeline on that?
Thank you for the question, and my apologies for the fact that it indicates not started. We're finalizing report. It's coming to the July IC meeting with a recommendation on a proposed power supply so that we can implement it within the current construction project.
Thank you. Any other questions on this page? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the next page, items 44 through 59. This is page 4 in our agenda. Director Toth.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at line 65, maybe I've jumped ahead. My apologies.
You're on the next page.
I'm on the next page. Oh,
Okay.
wow.
I don't see any on this page though, so let's move on to the next page. Page number 60 to 82, page 5. Director Toth.
helps if I'm off mute. The number 65, the emergency generator. I did note that there was an emergency generator or a generator system being looked at earlier in the list as well. And I'm just wondering if staff give consideration to grouping these together rather than issuing separate RFPs for 4 different generators in a year. Do we look at issuing it as a single, we're looking for 4 generators. We're just thinking we might get better pricing, better rates on shipping, things like that.
I can take that one, Chair. Most certainly purchasing has a list of all of these various projects, and we'll look to similar types of commodities, and we'll ensure that things like vehicles or heavy equipment, those types of things that are similar, to get economies of scale or efficiencies or more competitive bidding. So the answer is yes.
Thank you. Any other questions on this page? Director Hills.
Thanks, Chair. Line 74, cemetery or reservoir fencing. It says significant challenges with securing fencing contractors. So I'm wondering what a significant challenge is.
Sandy, if I mute. We went for several times to get quotes to do RFPs, and it looks like we now might have somebody found that might be interested in actually undertaking the project. They're just not interested in a project of this scale on the coast.
Go ahead.
So on coast, people to put up fences is a barrier on the coast. They want bigger projects. So is this one of these things about combining projects again, looking for ways to increase the size of projects so it becomes more beneficial for people to bid? Is that kind of part of the issue?
It's indeed part of the issue. So we now might have found somebody that is interested in doing the work. So we hope to get it done shortly, but it's definitely a challenge to find contractors that are interested in project like this, given the quantity at hand.
Is this chain link fence? Just suggest reach out to our Parks Department. There might be some synergies that can be had there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Will do.
All right. Any other questions on 60 through 82? I'm giving Len and so Director Lee and Director McMahon time to look these through because they lost their notes. You're good? Good, okay. Page 6, line items 83 through 105. Director McMahon.
Okay, 88, which is Reed Road and Elphinstone Road water main, is actually in area F, not area E. And I'm not sure how it can be 75% complete when we're not even anywhere near getting the well yet. So just curious.
I think there's some good reason to be curious there because the construction is indeed not underway yet. My apologies.
Thank you. Director Ties.
Yeah, I think my numbers are off now. I'm talking about the sludge issue from the Chapman Creek water treatment plant. I'm just wondering what the timeline is for currently exploring alternative approaches. I know that there's been some searching going on some exploring going on for a while, so I'm just wondering if we can have a report sometime soon on that.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Director. We're currently preparing an RFP, and I think I can provide more information on that at our next Infrastructure Service Committee meeting.
Thank you. Any other questions on lines 83 through 105? Director Hiltz.
Yeah, let me find it. Line 100, the Reed Road Pump Station for Zone 4 improvements. Is this project for that fire flows that happened up on Cemetery Road? Is it tied in with that? Is that what this pump is to provide?
Yes, yes, that's correct, Director.
And so what's the significance in terms of fire protection of this being on hold?
Thank you for the question. The significance is that it would still meet our the current requirements. The current state would still be the same, but the service improvements that was that's just not happening at the moment. But all regulatory requirements are being met at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on page 6 items? All right, moving on. Next page, page 7. This is line items 106 through 121. Director McMahon.
Yeah, Wood Creek Park. There, we were hoping to hear back on the federal grants sometime this summer. So just checking in on that, and also wondering, you know, given our staffing situation, whether we have the capacity to do the work if we get the grant.
Thank you very much for the question. We haven't received an update on the grant yet. It's early summer, so fingers crossed that we hope to receive positive news soon. And it's definitely on a work plan to give this project a priority once we have confirmation that we indeed received positive that we received the grant.
Thank you. Director Ties.
Yeah, I think I'm in the right range here for Roberts Creek Co-housing wastewater treatment plant. Just wondering if the allotted budget, I think it was about 30 grand, will cover the extra found work that's now having to be undertaken, or whether there's some adjustment that needs to be done.
Thank you for that question. We're currently assessing that, and we hope to provide a better insight on that at the July variance report.
Thank you. Any further questions on line items 106 through 121? Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Probably off topic, but a curiosity question relating to our wastewater plants. We never quite finished setting our capital allocation. In other words, where we thought the capital should be. I don't see any of them that are being done. I thought we were getting a grant to do a couple of them, but I don't see any project on this. Am I off base here, or am I missing something?
We did have some asset management grants to do some work on some further analysis on some of the wastewater plants. Some of those projects have been completed. So some of the subsequent projects coming out of here are more related to imminent asset failure, etc. Was there any other specific projects you were referring to?
No, I was curious about, I think there was 3 of them we had grants for looking at the future asset management. And so those ones are completed then?
Yes, yeah.
So they should be down in the bottom part of this report.
Okay.
We'll watch for them.
Sure.
Thank you. No other questions or comments on that page. Moving to page 8, line items 122 through 138. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I've lost my place again, but I saw bylaw 310 in there somewhere. Is there a draft imminently coming to a meeting near us?
GMO?
Thank you for the question. I'm just looking for the line, but just to make sure that I'm aligned with what we said a couple of weeks ago when we put this together. But yes, staff.
Oh, is this line 135? Is that the one we're looking at?
Yep. Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
Yep. Staff have cordoned off some time for a lead on long-range planning to put time into this project while we continue to manage a spike in workload for current planning. And at the current rate, we're pathing towards late Q3, early Q4, which I think we've spoken about earlier. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this page? Dr. Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Line 130, New Brighton Dock study. Two-part questions. In terms of staff, there's been our personnel changes with the GM. So is this under a community services now? Which GM is taking the lead, and has there been a response from the Squamish Nation?
Thanks for the question. On the latter part, we have not yet heard a response from the Squamish Nation. On the first part, staff are working together to ensure a smooth transition. As recently as this morning, I was speaking with people from Gambier about that transition and affirmed that for the time being, I remain the file lead. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Line items 122 through 138. Anything further? Director McMahon, Director Lee, you guys are good? Thank you. Moving on, items 139 through 148 on page 9. Director McMahon.
Yeah, line 147 is recreation facilities programming review. I'm just curious about the scope of that review. There was a service review done quite some time ago, but the scope was rather limited.
I'll start by saying I haven't read the draft RFP. I know it's still being pulled together. So I might have to defer to GM Hall to perhaps give you a little bit more information on the scope, as I'm not getting to that until the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. GM Hall.
Thanks, Chair. As discussed early in the process with staff, and I too have not, as part of our transition, I haven't read the scope, but all programming and the administration of that programming offered through our 5 facilities, which are represented by the 2 services, is in scope. Thanks.
Follow up, Director McMahon.
Yeah, will we have a chance to look at that RFP? I guess is what I'm asking, to find out what the scope is before it's issued. I'm just curious.
Thank you. Although I'm not really clear on SCRD processes at this point, I don't think that there would be a problem with us perhaps bringing a briefing to a future committee meeting on exactly what the project is about.
Thank you. Directors, anything further on page 9? Seeing nothing, let's move on to page 10, line items 149 through 164. Director Toth.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the Dakota Ridge snowmobile replacement and UTV repair, which is item 162. It mentions Q4 2021 due to supply chain delays, which I can certainly understand and appreciate. Is it hoped that this is all going to be complete before Dakota Ridge opens for the next season? Or are we going to have to limp along a little bit with the existing equipment?
Thank you for the question. I do know that my second week here, the crew was very busy working on Dakota Ridge items. And I know that it is hoped that we can get everything ready to go before we launch this coming season. But if not, we are certainly working on, plan B and making sure that our current equipment can limp along so that we can open this very valuable service to the residents.
Thank you. Anything further on page 10? Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. 152 Goodwin House Street removal. Actually haven't been over it. It's in my neighborhood. I've actually got there. But just wondering if there's been any feedback from the public on the project and what people are, any feedback from the public on it.
Thank you for the question, GM Hall. Perhaps before you start, that's on my tour in the next couple of weeks as well. So I do see that the project is complete, but I'm not sure if there's been public comments or not. Perhaps GM Hall can provide more info.
Thanks. Another question where you're catching us right at the moment of transition, committee. I have not heard anything reported through or received any inquiries or comments. I will say that staff were pleased with the final result of the site being cleaned up. It looks pretty good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions on page 10? So moving on to page 11, here are completed items. So Director Lee, are the items you were looking for on here?
I have got my answers to my questions. There was a note sent to me, so I'm good.
Thank you.
What's happened is that the spreadsheet line numbers are not the same as the agenda line numbers. So I was lost. So
okay.
Back to looking at the agenda line numbers.
Okay. All right. Any questions on completed projects? Director Hiltz.
Thanks. Yeah, it's completed project, the deep aerator. I guess this is probably like the first full year of it. So I'm wondering if there's a reply from, not that we're using the sports fields, but are we getting a good success with the deep aerator? It's pretty hard to tell, but any early indications?
Thank you for the question. Last week when I was over at Parks getting my detailed tour and information, and they took me to view all their equipment, of which they're very proud of, and the aerator was one of them. So I do know that it's a piece of equipment that they are extremely happy to have. And it certainly, from a turf health perspective, is extremely important. So other than, park staff being happy, then I assume that everything is good to go. So I do know it's a good and important piece of equipment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Director Pratt.
I was just about to put up my hand to ask about if we were sharing it with our member local governments, and I see that our CFO has also commented in our chat that it is being shared between the member municipalities. So I think that's fantastic. So that's collaboration amongst local governments. It's amazing. Thank you.
Right, Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, since our strategic plan review, I look at this document quite differently now. And this idea of the priorities behind it. And one of the things I kind of see is every line is the same priority. Whether it's a $3 million project or a $1,000 project. So it just kind of something that I'm working through. And one of the metrics that I just kind of, I summarized the total budget cost versus how much has been spent. We're kind of like 40 million allocated and 3 million spent. So it's just, it's one of these, how fast are we moving in all of the projects? So I'm looking for that big number, and we got essentially 10% of the budget is spent. So, and we got 6 months left. So I think this is kind of how to understand this document in terms of how the priorities are moving through. So I'm glad that staff are continuing to improve it. And it is a really highly valuable document in terms of what's going on. Yeah. So it's, so that I guess what I'm seeing is that it provides a metric, but the priorities really come from the board, I guess, because we don't really have a method of saying this is a high priority versus that. So just thanks for that.
Another piece then, as staff work with this year, that will feed into that for you is the year, like the anticipated completion. Because some of the projects that are on here are multi-year projects. We don't anticipate they're going to finish this year. But that would then help inform that as well. All right, I think further on completed projects, we have the last page, number 12, where it is canceled projects or deferred projects. So we have no canceled projects. We do have deferred projects. Any questions on the deferred projects? No questions. Thank you, staff. Appreciate you being here. So we'll move on to item number 3, Annex B, pages 13 through 27. This is a procurement policy update, tender bid award reports, and we have the Manager of Purchasing and Risk Management with us today. Good morning.
Good morning, thank you. As requested by the board, staff have updated section 9.5 of the procurement policy to reflect disclosure of qualified bid amounts and vendors' names. Once the change is enacted, staff will include language in our solicitation documents notifying vendors of the requirements that this information will be disclosed in a public forum. This consent will be mandatory requirement in the solicitation documents, which will support written consent guidelines for public procurement proactive release of information for individuals named responses, and in compliance with the Freedom of Information Act. This is done to mitigate potential risks to the SCRD with respect to disclosure that is harmful to business interests. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I was just curious on page 22. There's a reference to aggregated pricing. So if there were, this under 9.5, so if there were 3 or 4 bidders on a project, does that mean that all the bids would be aggregated? I don't quite understand how that plays out.
Ms. Crop.
Thank you for the question. Aggregated pricing just means we won't disclose individual pricing. So if we won't disclose hourly rates or the price per wicket. Thank you.
Or the breakdown of this is how much we're doing on electrical, and this is how much is for whatever. It's the total price. All right, item in 9.5, page, the next page, page 23. So in the revision, there's just I wasn't clear about the last line. So it indicates that staff will ensure that the disclosure requirement is in the solicitation documents, that written consent has been provided from contractors or subcontractors who are identified as individuals rather than organizations. It says, otherwise this information will not be released. So otherwise the contractor or subcontractor, individual subcontractor or subcontractors will not be released, or none of the information will be released. I didn't find that to be clear.
Thank you for the question. It would be that the contractor's name or subcontractor's name would not be released without the consent, but how we're going to set up our proposals is we're going to make it a mandatory. So they must agree to disclose it. And this is, again, to line up with the procurement proactive guide document that I've referenced, and the Freedom of Information Act for the harmful of a business interest section.
So in other words, even though the document, because I went to the document that you referred to, it indicates that if they don't give us permission, that we can't release the information. Is that correct?
Yes, but we're making it so under procurement, when you make something a must,
Yeah.
They have to abide by it, or we don't even evaluate it. So
Okay.
by making it a mandatory requirement, if they don't agree to it, the evaluation team doesn't even see it. They don't evaluate it. Is the option to go forward.
So what you're saying is this last line is not necessary to be even be in here, because you'll ensure that they have given permission. Otherwise, they won't even be considered.
Yeah, yes. The only thing I'm hesitant about is if we do a process that would have been direct quotes, like a vendor would have gone out, like a staff person would have gone out, and we do have some templates. Sometimes they do it by phone or they do that. So I'm just concerned about that aspect. So I can say that majority of them, but there may be the one-off, which is why it's in there.
Okay, so then I would suggest an amendment to the line where it would say, otherwise individual contractors or subcontractors will not be released. Or information on contractors or subcontractors. Probably should say that, right? Otherwise, information on contractors or subcontractors will not be released. So it's not just this information, because we're in the previous clauses, you're talking about everybody. Okay, thank you. Director McMahon.
Yeah, this is just a general question. Does this policy apply to financial services that we purchase, like bank accounts or investments?
Thank you for the question. We do have an exemption list at the end of the policy as an appendice that outlines some of the exemptions. And then there is some trade agreement exemptions if the trade agreements apply, like financial banking institutions, things like that. They're exempt under the trade agreement. We could still choose to go to procurement, but we do list publicly what the exemptions are to the policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Beamish.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the amendments as well. I guess going back again to 9.5, would you see very many contracts or submissions from individuals in the $100,000 plus range? I would expect they would be corporations duly bonded and insured and everything else like that, as opposed to individuals.
Thank you. I agree that we probably wouldn't see that. The Sunshine Coast is a little bit informal. So I'm not going to guarantee that, but my professional would tell me that we would see very few, if any. Thank you.
My suspicion, you probably don't see any at that level that we would actually consider to be a valid bid on the contract, because they'd have to have lots of backup, including insurance and bonding capability and everything else like that. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments about this report, the policy?
I'd move the recommendation, and I believe there was an amendment in there.
Yes.
To approve the policy as amended.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded. Seeing no further questions or comments, all those in favor? Oh, sorry, hold on, Director Pratt.
Okay, can you clarify what that amendment is exactly? Because I'd like to hear that before I vote on this.
Okay, Tara, do you have that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that be approved as amended as follows. Section 9.5 award reports to read otherwise, information pertaining to the contractor or subcontractor will not be released.
Director Pratt?
Okay. It's honestly, I think we could probably even just drop that last sentence. I don't think it's necessary if it's been disclosed in other areas, but policy is by committee is always fun this way, but I don't think it's necessary in response to what the explanation that we've had from Ms. Kropp. But I'm not going to hold it up any longer.
Okay. So there's a recommendation on the floor that the amendments to the procurement policy be approved as amended. All those in favor? Thank you. Moving on. Next item, financial reporting requirements and statement of financial information. Year ended December 31st, 2020. And I'm going to turn it over to our CFO.
Thank you, Chair. So the statement of financial information is a legislative requirement, and it includes our financial information, such as our financial statements, which were approved in April, statement of remuneration and goods and services. This particular report is made available to the public. It is advertised as such and is submitted to the ministry per our statutory requirements. So if there's any questions, staff are available. Thank you.
All right, I'm just going to ask you to speak to one of the comments you made about timing.
Oh, yes. So one of the process improvements that staff are discussing are the efficiencies of presenting this financial information. Because we present our financial statement and our audit report in April, we're looking to opportunities to present the statement of financial information and have that approved at the same time. So we'll just sort of expedite the process. And some of the information is redundant, so it'll create some efficiencies there as well. So we're shooting that for 2022. Thank you.
Thank you. Directors, questions? Director McMahon.
Yeah, just a small question. On page 45, our future parks acquisition reserve fund, have we ever spent money in that fund to acquire a park?
The last time we spent money was for the adjacent property from Cooper's Green, and that was skill testing question, I think around 2012 or thereabouts. And it was actually a private landowner who was looking to sell it and had approached the regional district. And so it was decided to buy that property.
Thank you. Any further questions? Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. So the timing part, this would most likely come in the April CAS then? Is that when the auditor report comes, that's the idea, is to have those things bundled in that meeting in April. Is that? Oh, thanks.
Yes. Any further questions or comments? Director McMahon.
Yeah, you got to me before I even got my hand up. I would like to move the recommendations on page 28.
All right, is there a seconder for those recommendations? Seconded. Seeing no further questions or comments, all those in favor? Thank you very much. Moving on to Annex D, item 5. This is the Sunshine Coast Regional District Corporate Annual Report. CFO.
Yes, thank you. I have the pleasure, Chair, to present this particular report, but I must give kudos to our communications division this year, who have done such a marvelous job. And Aidan Buckley and Cecilia Garcia in particular have done an amazing job this year. So a lot of new things were integrated into the annual report. And this particular annual report is also submitted to the GFOA International as part of our financial reporting award. So Aidan and I are here to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you. Directors. Director Pratt.
Just really a simple comment and kudos, just echoing the CFO. Love the work that Manager Buckley and Ms. Garcia have done, and it's fantastic to see this, and just communications in general has just been amazing. So thank you to the communications team for making this happen and giving it a new approach. That's awesome.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Again, a follow up on the thanks. It's more readable this year. The single page, I read it on my smartphone. I'm small, but was able to do it. And I'm paying more attention to it. I think this is one of the only places that the stat water consumption per liter comes in. I think is the only place, as far as I can tell, which is a key stat. It's just over 400. One of the things I am kind of noting is this a redundancy of data, wildfire, childcare, housing, all this kind of data stuff that we seem to about population and financial stuff, workplace. And if anyone remembers score.serd.ca, anyone remember that? It was it's still a SERD website. That's 2006 was the last update in terms of stats, but there was this, we've been talking about open data. And so that I'm looking for these key pieces like liters per capita, and I'm going, it's somewhere. And so it is hard to find, but it's there. So I keep wondering about this open data and this common data sources. Regional growth strategy is going to create a whole nother set of data. And it just seems to be, we do it over and over again. And it gets produced in different reports. So it's just something that I see, and it can make it difficult to know which is the real data as they're updated in each report. So I don't know if staff sees this as well, as that it's I guess it is a redundancy, doing the data over and over again. And I see, staff is already talking about consolidating this. So is there any other places where, how is it all managed, I guess? Like, does staff have this at their fingertips, I guess? These kinds of statistical information.
Well, I can start to comment on that, Chair. And some of the criteria or the statistical information that's included in here is a requirement of the GFOA guidelines based on some best principles of annual reporting. Some of the other types of data that you're speaking to is collected based on statutory requirements for other types of services we provide. So water consumption, those types of things. Different environmental statistics are also available. We also have third-party groups such as BC Transit, for instance, that collects certain types of data. Some of this data is not our data. It's Statistics Canada or Stats BC data. So, there's various sources of information, and I think as divisions are starting to collect more statistical information on their services to get some of those benchmarks. So we're trying to integrate those. And I know one that came up in specific, and we've made a note for next year's annual report, is specific to building permit revenues or number of building permits. Because I think, to your point, there is certain trends and maybe being aware of some more relevant trends that we should be tracking. So, if there are some suggestions, by all means, we can explore how we can do that, or if that's feasible for us to do.
I think what Ms. Perot is referring to is on page 22, where it talks about development applications revenue. We're talking about how busy our building department is, and yet it's showing $58,000 in revenue. That's not building, right? So when I read it first, I went 58,000. Like, that doesn't seem like enough given what we're doing. So, I think for me it was, to your point, Director Hiltz, are we presenting the data in the report that supports the statements we make about the regional district? Right? So our planning department is really busy. 58,000 doesn't support that. right? So it's that kind of lens, I think, that we're looking at. Okay, Director McMahon.
Yes, I always enjoy reading this report and looking at all the pretty graphs and pie charts. But I'm going to raise this again, that the descriptions of the individual areas, like on page 28, area E and then area F, are way out of date. Area E no longer has large tracts of undeveloped land, I can assure you. And area F has not been the fastest growing area in the regional district since, I don't know, 2005 or something. So, you know, it's probably time to revise those. And the other thing, and it's just a comment, it's local government language, but on the where do your tax dollars go, the way we describe our services is not the way anybody understands it. Transportation services, that's transit, it's the buses. Health services is the cemetery. And protective services is mostly, it's fire, it's the fire departments and emergency planning. And I always have to explain these pie charts, you know, to the residents of my area, because otherwise they don't really know what they mean. So I don't know if it's possible to make it a little more easily understood, or whether we're just living in government language land. Just my comment.
All right. Any further questions or comments about the annual report? Dr. Hills.
Yeah, well, the thing that I do note, it's a corporate report. Like it doesn't belong to elected, doesn't belong to staff. It's the corporation which exists of both elected and staff. And so I guess, you know, we as a board, we see it for distribution. The end product, is it okay? Send it out. Yeah, it's already on the website. Yeah, it's a terrific document. So it almost seems like through the strategic planning is that there's a connection to the annual report somehow. And you know, like when do we put in comments about it? Director McMahon talks about the various areas, the summaries. I'm just looking at the last page, and 1986, a very significant year for the district of Sechelt to become a village to a district and no longer area C. And that's part of our history, and there's still space on that page to add that. So I think there is places to kind of improve what we know about ourselves, I suppose, as a corporation. So when do we put this stuff into the process? You know, next year's is a year from now, and so when the editing happens, and when is all this, like, do we ever see a draft? You know, I'm not sure if I want to see a draft necessarily, but as Director McMahon, how do these things get changed as we go along? There's a good solid template. We kind of plug in all the stuff. Improvements are made. Where should we put our input into this, or the general public? Like, do they have comments on, I want to see this in the annual report? I guess, how do we keep revising it, I guess, is the question.
Ms. Burrow.
I'm gonna start, and then I'm gonna pass it over to Aiden for any comments on some of the other parts. The first part, and again, the CAO can jump in as well, but I think one of the process improvements with a strategic plan that would be helpful in tying into some of the performance indicators or the reporting back to the public is that performance metric out of the strategic plan. So we don't have any metrics or those types of indicators in our strategic plan. So being able to measure them, we're reporting on particular outcomes, but there's not particular metrics that have been developed as an outcome. So they're somewhat ad hoc at this point from reporting back. So that's integrated into this particular report. And then some of the other type of comments on content, I'm going to pass it off to Aiden, but I think most certainly we're already starting to work on that.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Tina. Thanks, everyone, for your comments. And I just want to echo what Tina said earlier and just really highlight Cecilia Garcia, our communications officer, and just the incredible work that she in particular put into this document. To your questions, Director Hilt, where does your feedback start factoring into this document right now, quite frankly? So with the individual area descriptions, that's something that we'll look to revise absolutely for next year. And we'll ensure that that's done, right across, whether that's in the website or other documents that we may use that on. I think it's just a factor of us having more capacity now in the communications team, that we have the ability to go back and actually start looking at some of this language, which in the past may have been more in a templated format, and make the language more accessible for the public. With the document itself, we are going to do a more concerted push of this document out to the public through a news release and through social media. We're going to make it available on our Let's Talk page as well, our engagement platform. And we're really keen to hear what the public have to say about it. What else do they want to hear? When we started speaking about, the annual report this year, and one of the common themes that we wanted to have in it was to start telling our story a little bit as a regional district through the report itself. And I think you'll see that in kind of some of the wins that we've highlighted throughout, and the great work the staff have been doing. So I think you're going to see that moving forward. But all this feedback is great, and when we're sitting here this time next year, I hope that when you look at it, you can see that it's all being factored in. So.
Okay, I'm going to talk to process, and I don't know if it's the same at the regional district as it is at the district of Sechelt or for the town of Gibsons. We have to actually publish our draft we have to publish it, two news cycles or something, certain period of time. It has to be out as a draft to solicit input from both council and the public. Could be errors in spelling, it could be errors in information, it could be, as Director Hilt said, additional fine-tuning of information. And that then has to get incorporated in the final one that gets approved by the council. So I don't know if that process is the same at the regional district, but something similar could potentially be incorporated. Ms. Pearl.
Yes, so municipalities actually have a statutory requirement for the community charter to outline their process for their annual report. Regional districts do not have that statutory requirement. So the regional district, the SRD, elected to create an annual report for themselves to really meet that benchmark for the community. Mm-hmm. So in order for us to do that, I think it would be less formal. It would be a little informal. I don't think we'd want to, I think we'd want to consult with ministry to start doing charter related requirements that aren't, but I think there can be an informal step to that from soliciting feedback. So yeah, we can take that into consideration.
Okay. Any further questions or comments? Thank you for the report. It's fabulous. I actually spent more time reading this one than I did the one for the District of Sechelt, just to let you know. I really enjoyed the information here. All right, so we have some recommendation, or a recommendation on page 96. Director Pratt, would you like to move that recommendation?
I would love to move the recommendations on page 96.
And I have a number of people seconded. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Moving on to item 6, Annex E. This is Financial Audit Services Contract Update. Ms. Pearl.
Thank you, Chair. So this particular report is to amend the contract for our audit services. It has been 5 years since we've been engaged with BDO. And so at the end of the term for our contract for 2020 audit services at the end of 2021, we realized that we had exceeded our contract value. So the purpose of this report is to amend the contract, get board approval for the purchasing policy, and be able to pay our auditors for this year.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Director Pratt.
just would move the recommendations on page 97 so we can pay our auditors.
Thank you. Is there a second? Seconded? All those in favor? Thank you. I know there have been a lot more bits and pieces that the auditors have had to do for us in the last year due to some changes in regulations, and totally understandable. All right, we are at 10:37. Would you like to take a break? All right, 5 minutes. How about if we make it, we are at 10:37. Why don't we make it 10:45? Because it's just over 5 minutes. All right, see you back at 10:45. Welcome back to the Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting of the Sunshine Coast Regional District on Thursday, June 24th. We are resuming with Annex F, number 7, and this is pages 99 through 116, Fire Department 20-year capital plans 2021 update. And we have presenting to us Darren Joseph, Asset Management Coordinator. Welcome, Mr. Joseph.
Thank you, Chair. The fire department capital plans were originally developed in 2016 and were updated this year by identifying assets that were recently replaced, forthcoming work required at each fire hall, and each department's plan to replace their firefighting equipment. In preparing these plans, it was noted that each fire department will require significant investment over the next 3 to 5 years. Options to address increases were explored, including variations of borrowing periods from the typical 5 years to 10 years.
Welcome back to the Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting of the
Excuse me.
Regional District on Thursday, June 24th.
My apologies. As anticipated, by extending the borrowing periods, lower reserve contributions were required, and in some cases, it was more likely to achieve a continuous annual inflationary increase through the duration of the plan. In the attachments that follow, they show the variations that were developed by staff. Scenario A shows the results of using 5-year borrowing terms, while Scenario B shows the results of 10-year borrowing terms. For the Egmont and District Volunteer Fire Departments, Scenario A and B consider purchase of used tender, brush, and engine trucks at 20% of full value, which is similar to previous purchases. In Scenario C and D, we created a sensitivity analysis where costs were potentially increased to 40% of full value. Thank you.
Thank you. Directors, I'm sure you have questions. Director Ties.
If Egmont is buying used trucks, is there not some sort of requirement by the underwriters that you have to have certain age on equipment? And I'm wondering why Egmont is exempt from that one.
Who wants to take that one?
I can jump in. I don't see our manager of protective services on here, so and by all means, if any of the fire chiefs want to correct me. So I believe that they're not exempt. So there is still some useful life and they would still have to undergo those particular permitting. It's just that the permit with a new vehicle or type of equipment would be far longer than they would experience a permit. So that's the difference.
Thank you. Fire Chief Higgins, did you want to comment, or is that sufficient?
No, thank you for that invitation. The Fire Underwriters Survey actually mandates that our front line engine only be within the 20-year age. So if they stay within, if I'm actually answering the question there, but that's from my knowledge, that's what that refers to. We have other vehicles that are much older than 20 years, but that frontline engine needs to be 20 years and less.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yeah, first of all, by the way, I am liking our new report template. I thought this was a good fire department report. Nice and concise, but enough information. So does this asset management plan include the buildings, the fire halls? Or is it just the equipment?
The capital plan that staff prepared included the halls and equipment over a 20-year period. Thank you.
So follow up to, go ahead, Director McMahon.
I have another one, but if you're following up.
Follow up on that then. So is that looking at the status quo? I mean, one of the conversations that I don't know if we're engaging in is around expansion. So additional fire halls, additional, bigger buildings. Is that part of the conversation, or are the buildings included to maintain what we currently have?
The capital plan only addressed what we currently have. And it is worth noting that for the assets for each fire department, only critical assets were considered in similar fashion to the recreation capital plans.
So the conversation that at some point we would want to engage in is, sorry, I'm just putting somebody in here. How do we build for the future? Because that would be something that we would need to look at as well inside of asset management and ensuring that we have the sufficient capital to provide for the community as we need in the growth. Another conversation. Director McMahon, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the AAPs. I mean, it seems very sensible to borrow on a 10-year basis for this. Would it be possible to do all the AAPs at once for all the fire halls? Because it's all fire service, and people don't always know which area they live in or what applies to them or whatever. I don't know. I just thought I'd ask.
Mm-hmm. Corporate officer.
Thank you for the question. Yes, I'm actually exploring opportunities to run concurrent AAPs. Comox Valley, they do something similar every spring. They run what's called a unified AAP process. So I am looking into that.
Interesting. Things we find out. Director Ties.
Yeah, when I saw the heading for this report, I thought we would be getting something similar to what we saw with the wastewater treatment facilities, where we sort of saw the spikes in the outlays of future, I guess, capital investment. And so I'm wondering if that is going to be an exercise that's going to be done, or if this is sort of more of a, if this is all we're going to see, because I really appreciated that graph for the wastewater treatment facilities once I saw it, and that really gave me a good picture as to what's coming down the pipeline. And I think I guess there's a certain amount of uncertainty with how long equipment's going to last, but I think staff should have some sort of idea, I would hope.
Who wants to address that one? Ms. Pro.
Yeah, just so I can clarify. So the attachments in the appendices provide some of that information. Now, for the wastewater facilities, there was sort of an asset management plan. So there's a lot of context. So it was a formal document. At this particular time, that hasn't been developed for the Protective Services Division. That could potentially be looked at. Some of the differences, and this is where, as we develop more and more of these capital plans, asset management plans deal with preventative maintenance, service standards. So they're more of a service review. This review, akin to that of what was mentioned by Darren, was that these are specifically addressing the capital requirements, because these services without this equipment are essentially handcuffed. They need these. These are critical to the service delivery. So they are a little bit different. And so we are trying to refine that. But really, in conjunction to that, we are trying to establish, as the same with the wastewater facilities, is what is the sustainable funding levels for these particular services. And in 2018, some of this type of information was highlighted, and that was a more comprehensive service review, is that the capital plans need to be understood. So when there were recommendations and proposals coming forward for certain levels of reserve contribution, that was under the assumption that we would be funding the capital requirements strictly from reserves. This analysis looks at alternative and more affordable ways to fund. And so that's why we're presenting other options for consideration. No decisions at this point. It's just for information, and subsequent reports will come on that.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yeah, the graphs are helpful because you don't have to be a financial genius to figure out that if the line goes off the top of the graph, then it's probably not a good thing. So the 10-year scenario B sounds excellent to me. If you wanted that feedback, looks good.
Thank you. Director Ties.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. And I don't know why, but I didn't see the graphs on my first read through. So that's kind of what I was asking for. So all good. Thank you. And I did want to mention, I did want to speak to what Director Seeger says earlier. And I think with the expansion of fire halls, I think that's part of our regional growth strategy process. I think there needs to be a discussion if we're going to add density in areas, or then we need to start looking at fire halls too. And I know Roberts Creek could probably use another one closer to Gibson's, and maybe towards the upper side of Roberts Creek, but in the future, if that's going to get denser. So I think that's certainly a conversation we need to have around the regional growth strategy.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. I'm wondering about this information, and does it get to the Gibsons and District Fire Protection Commission? As an agenda item, it seems like it should probably get there somehow. So it's a question to staff: does this funnel in to the Fire Commission somehow, or could it funnel into it in the next meeting whenever we have that?
Yes, I think we most certainly would be bringing that information, because there may be some decision points coming forward, especially as we move ahead to future budgets. So these are relevant, most certainly. So I don't know the frequency. I see that Chief Michael is and Manager Trite is online. So I'm not sure on the scheduling of those meetings.
Would it help staff if we made a recommendation that this report be referred?
That'd be great.
Director
I think
Hills.
we would do that anyway, but yeah, that'd be great.
A motion to do what we would typically do, yes, refer to.
Thank you, and that's seconded. And this would be rural areas only? Voting? I'm going to assume rural areas because there's nothing to do with, and Gibson's? Gibson, would it be Gibson's in Area E and Area F maybe only?
Or is the action just to refer it to the Fire Commission?
Yes.
And this report is pertaining to all the fire departments, so I would say all rural areas plus town of Gibson's would be the vote.
All right, so there's a recommendation on the floor. All those in favor? Thank you. All right, any further questions? Director Lee.
Yes, actually, I guess I've been a little bit slow here in following all of the discussion. I got three questions. The first one is, it's a revisit of that frontline engine and the use of a used vehicle in Egmont. I'm kind of curious how a used vehicle could meet the 20 years or less requirement, because who would retire one like that? And also I was curious about the analysis of a used vehicle being a good investment. So both those questions, that's the first question.
Thank you. Mr. Trite, is that a question for you or?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Purchase of used vehicles, it's always a balance between how much you save and how many years of use you can get out of them. So if we were to purchase a vehicle, say that was, 10 years old, we may get it at a 30, 40, 50% discount over a new one. but then we only get half the life out of it. And so there's always a trade-off between how much you can save by buying a used vehicle as compared to how many years of service you can get out of it. Just similar to buying any sort of a used car, for example. You save on it, but then you don't get as much use out of it, and you may have to have higher maintenance costs associated with that used vehicle as compared to what would have with a new vehicle, a new apparatus.
Director Lee.
So that's a business decision we'll make later on when it is time to buy an Egmont vehicle, then I guess, eh? Is that, how will the decision be made then when it comes time to get one for Egmont?
That would be a financial decision, as well as the fire underwriter survey, as we always talk about, tends to have a lot of influence on what we do. I mean, we don't have to follow what they say, but certainly when they have such influence on the insurance grades, then we certainly can't ignore what they say. But yeah, when it comes time, we have to go out there, look at what's available new, look at what's available used, what the savings is on used vehicles, how many years of service we can get out of those used vehicles. So that's, yeah, at that time, we'd have to make a business decision based on those factors.
The other one I was curious about, I've never seen anywhere in a business case, but does the savings on the insurance from having a fire, being in a fire protection area, does the amount of money that homeowners save strictly on their fire insurance come anywhere near the difference in their taxation?
In most situations, the savings on your fire insurance far surpasses what people pay in taxes for fire protection. Now, Area A is in a bit of a unique situation because they have so few homes. So in that particular scenario, would have to look at it. It would not be anywhere near the significant savings you would get in a larger center where you have more people, where the tax burden is spread out more. But typically, a home might save $1,000 a year, $1,500 a year on fire insurance by being within by having fire protection, and their contributions to the service might only be a couple $100s a year. I think that'd be probably pretty typical in most areas. But when you have a very sparse population, the tax burden, of course, is pretty significant for those few homes.
Probably still pretty close, though, I guess, eh? That's something that I think needs to be pointed out when we're going to do our little presentation in Egmont. The other question is, do we traditionally get grants for things like new fire trucks?
Not normally. Grants tend not to be as readily available to fire departments that are associated with municipal government or local government. The understanding is that they would finance those. If you had some small department somewhere that didn't have any local government associated with it, some society-run fire department, they might be in a better position to do that. But typically, we don't have grants to cover the purchase of large apparatus.
Okay, that seems like a shame. And this is probably a question for Tina. I was thinking about the AAP versus the 10 years versus 5 years. If you do it under 5 years, you don't need to go for an AAP. You do it 10 years, you need to go for an AAP. And in Egmont, we're looking to increase the limit because we've hit the top limit that we're allowed to requisition. Should we wait until we have an AAP for everybody, or is this a two-step process for Egmont?
Well, I can answer by saying we've already reached the limit, what what the proposal going forward is, and again, we're going to be speaking to the community about this, which is to raise it to a sufficient level. Nothing too exorbitant, but I think this informs part of that decision. And again, this context is going to be integrated in part of that presentation, which is understanding the needs of the service. And again, there's some assumptions built into that particular service, which is that we would still continue to use the fact that we're going to have used equipment, so at a lesser cost, as was noted at the beginning. So I think there's, in the staff report that was presented in later May, there was a little bit of a sensitivity analysis and saying, these are kind of some options. This is what it raises now, and here's what we're recommending. I think that somewhere in that neighborhood would be sufficient because, of course, you don't want to keep going back to raise the limit. So I think you want to do it modestly and ensure that people understand that although you have the ability to raise that tax, obviously the board has the discretion on the budget, right? So that is your policy ability to control that.
Yes, thank you. I've got it.
So undercurrent kind of conversation that I heard in that was that the information that goes out to Egmont should incorporate new versus used equipment and the impacts on the cost and on the taxes going forward, so that they know what their options are and what the board has sort of is leaning towards, just in case there's a difference of opinion out there in the community. And then the other conversation was, how soon would we need to have an AAP for borrowing in Egmont to provide equipment? I haven't looked at the graph in detail. So, are they close enough now? Like, do they need to go now to borrow? And should that then be coupled with an AAP to increase the limit?
Well, the process would be that, of course, these particular items would come through budget and we would give some options. So I think the decision on how we would go out, if AAP was the way we would go about it, if it was eminent, but we do foresee it in the plan within the next 3 years.
Okay.
So that would be a recommendation that you can anticipate in the next 3 years.
Okay. Thank you. Director Lee?
Yes, thank you for that, Director Seegers. It's my question was along that lines, but are we going to need to increase the limit twice? And I think I'd like to confirm the answer was no, we'll do it just this once. And when we do go to an AAP, it will fit within the upper limit. Is that the correct answer?
That's the recommendation going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments on fire capital planning? All right, seeing no further questions, let's move on to item 8, Annex G, pages 117 through 131. This is with regards to the Climate Action Revenue Incentive Program, the CARROT program ending. And over to Ms. Pro.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is to provide a formal report to the committee and to the public that the government, the provincial government, has elected to discontinue the CARROT program. There wasn't a lot of media associated with this, and so we also wanted to highlight that particular piece. And there's also been some advocacy that has been brewing amongst other local governments. And so there's subsequent correspondence here. And so there's a recommendation that the Sunshine Coast support some of the recommendations to address the CARROT or the discontinuation of the program. So happy to answer any further questions that the committee may have.
Thank you. Directors, Director McMahon.
Yeah, I'm supportive of the advocacy on this because, as mentioned in the letter from Saanich, I think it was, that we need more sources of funding that are reliable and do not require us to apply for grants. I mean, this is a huge problem. And so, yeah, I could support that. I have a lot of issues with the Green BC program. It doesn't seem to be well designed for rural and remote areas. And of course, the government is in bed with Fortis, and the program basically greenwashes natural gas. We've got to get off combustion for home heating, period. And the program is not going there. However, complain.
Thank you, Director Ties.
Yeah, happy to move recommendations on page 117.
Thank you, and it's seconded. One question I would have is, I don't see any action coming out of here. So we're indicating that we support, the resolution. Should a letter go? Should we send this to somebody? How should that be followed up?
I would say if the board would like to do that, most certainly we can, if there's a recommendation, we can follow it up to a letter to a minister or whomever they feel appropriate.
Thank you. Director Pratt?
So as a suggested amendment, I would say that the SCRD board send a letter to the District of Saanich first as a thank you and an indication for support for the motion, and that a letter be sent to, I guess, minister, to the same ministers as Saanich has indicated in their letter regarding the carrot program.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for the amendment? Seconded. All right. I'd look for, this will be rural areas only. Nope, sorry, all directors. Voting on the amendment only first. All those in favor of the amendment? Thank you. Then we have an amended motion on the floor. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you, staff, for bringing that forward. Moving on, item number 9, Annex H, pages 132 through 143, Cooper's Green Hall Replacement Project. So there are a number of recommendations, and then there are a number of attachments to this report. So first I'm going to turn over to GM Hall.
Thank you, Chair. Staff were directed to assess the implications of a variety of questions from the board or changes to the project scope in order to provide clear information to community partners, to our ISIP grant program funder, and to confirm divisional work plans and retain our contracted consultants. Clear direction on next steps is needed. Staff have prepared recommendations associated with restarting the design phase of the project based on time elapsed and the need to redo or refresh some work to align with new building code, step code, and accessibility standards. A contract amendment is required. If the committee recommends increasing the scope of work to address items in attachment A, additional incremental resources will be required. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Director Pratt.
Thank you, Chair Seegers. So I do have a question and then a couple of comments. First off, in the recommendations, it says the value of the contract be increased from maximum of, and I just wonder if we could get clarity on how much it has been increased, because we typically put that in a motion.
Thank you for the question. The current value of the contract is $138,300.
Okay, thank you. So I want to say thank you to staff and directors for the thought. There's been a lot of consideration, a lot of work done by staff, and I know there regionally, we're looking at this for the rural areas because we will all be paying we'll all be paying into the debt as well as for the ongoing maintenance. It is also going to be a new regional resource. And I would like to indicate, and I know you've got a speakers list in front of you, Chair, but I would say that I would be happy to proceed with the recommendations on page 132. And I'll put that out there as a motion right now.
All right, well, let's see, is there a seconder? Seconded? Okay, so it's on the floor. Director McMahon.
Okay, I'm going to speak against this motion. I have previously expressed my concerns about this project, which is out of scale and scope with the other community halls. In fact, this hall would be as big as all 4 of our existing halls put together. And we don't have a policy for the building or acquisition of community halls. And we don't have asset management plans for our existing halls yet. So I have issues with this. Area E does not want to pay into this project. If the residents of Half Moon Bay want to build a country club and are willing to pay for its construction, operation, and long-term maintenance through taxation of Area B, then I'm fine with that. But I really cannot see Area E paying for that. So while I generally think that larger regional services are better than having a lot of little services, I would prefer to see the funding for community halls done by electoral area. So that Area E, we would happily pay for our 2 existing community halls. And then each area could do its own. So that's my feeling at the moment.
Thank you. Director Tice.
Yeah, well, that sounds like a really good idea for me because I don't have a community hall that belongs to the SCRD in my jurisdiction, so I would happily jump on board for that. And I do have some concerns around this proposal as well, from probably going north of $1,000 per square foot to build this place, to rising sea levels within the expected lifespan of this building that may or may not affect it, to yeah, so I you know, if Area B is willing to go into this with eyes wide open and is willing to pay for all that, and I would reluctantly raise my hand for it, but I can't justify that building at that price, at that location, at this point in time. I can't justify that to my taxpayers. I'm sorry.
Director Pratt.
Thanks, and I understand the concerns from the other directors. I would like to say that my community is, the vast majority is in a great degree of support for the hall. I have received comments to the negative as well, but also to the effect that, they are concerned a little bit about the size. However, there's been a lot of community conversation about this in my area. I would say the majority do support. And I would say I would look to staff on what that would look like, because if you were pulling apart the community halls out of the service or making them each their own service, that sounds like a legislative and financial question that I'm sure our staff are more adept at speaking to.
Thank you. Who'd like to start?
I can make a very general comment, and then if Tina has something to add, that would be fine. These are things that these are. Oh, I better get my face closer again, just in case my audio is bad. And again, apologies for my huge face. These are things that the board has the ability to entertain ideas like this. I would say that in terms of starting to look at isolating projects or isolating portions of regional services, that could be the start of some very, for lack of a better term, the beginning of a very long and slippery slope of selected portions of regional services, which could end up being fairly complex and difficult / awkward, to say the least. However, these are conversations that could be entertained. That would be a general look at it. I don't know, Tina, if you had some specifics around how that would work within the existing service establishment.
Thank you. Tina?
I'm going to pass it over to our corporate officer, but I think in short, staff would have to go back and research it and get a better understanding of what scope is really being contemplated.
Thank you. Sherry?
Yes, thank you for the question. There would be definitely legislative process around such a decision. So if we could take it away and look at it a bit, we could come back with more concrete options and information.
Thank you. Director Lee. Wow, everybody's got their hands up. Okay, Director Lee.
First off, we've never had a hall built in Area A by anybody but Area A people. But I am acutely aware of the win some, lose some theory of a regional district. And I do echo what CAO McKinley just said. It is a very slippery slope if we down it. And I do note as well is that we've already paid for other halls. So perhaps there's an accounting thing here if we're going to break this out. But I would say that CFO Perot and Corporate Officer Sherry, Reed, are the right ones to bring how you would do this. I'm not opposed to reviewing every one of our shared services. I'm not sure how I would come out, but I am very much against cherry picking to benefit anyone or even multiple areas at the expense of another area. So that's all I have to say on it.
Thank you. Director Toth.
Thank you, Chair. A comment and then a question. You know, I wish that Seashelt could participate in this. Cooper's Green is very well used by the residents of Seashelt, and residents participate in events there all the time. For my question, I can't recall seeing it before, but do we have an approximate number of what taxation amount to fund the gap for this community hall would be? Are we looking at 30 cents per $100,000 or $16 per $100,000? Just to put some context around the money discussion.
I'll do my best. We're pulling numbers that were generated last year, and I'll qualify this by saying it's based on project costs that were prepared at the time that we applied for grant funding. But the information that was provided last winter was that if borrowing is between $500,000 and $750,000 over 5 years, and interest rates are between 0.92 and 1.25%, property taxes could increase between $1.13 to $2.87 per $100,000 of assessed value. Thanks.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Okay, my turn again. Yes, I do understand the slippery slope. And were this something that I would consider an essential service, like, I don't know, firefighting or regional water, something like that, I wouldn't want to go there. Even ports, which are a key transportation infrastructure, Area E will pay in. But this is a recreational thing, and our recreation master plan identifies community halls as being primarily for neighborhood-focused programming for residents who would be ideally within walking distance. Again, this project is out of scope and out of scale with our existing halls. So they were intended, these halls, as local neighborhood halls. And so for that reason, it makes perfect sense to me, for the individual areas to pay for our halls. We pay for street lighting that way. We have all kinds of piddly little services that we pay for according to who's using them. And so I would be willing to go in that direction.
Before I go to the next speaker on the list, I'm going to make a comment and then a question to staff. So the last time this came before committee, the directors came forward with all these questions. And they said, this is information that we need to be able to determine the next steps. So staff went away and got that information and are presenting some of that here and saying, this is how we're going to get the rest of it. So at this point, directors don't have the answers to all their questions that they asked. Okay, so that's just a comment. So then to our GM, we've got the two attachments are called here. So the two attachments with motions, with information, with dollar amounts, are those all included in the recommendations that are on page 132 that is in the motion that's on the floor?
Thanks for the question, Chair. No, they're not, for the ones that represent a change or an increase to the scope of the project. The only one that is point number 1 in the numbered points of the recommendation to carry on with the work to complete an operating plan in partnership with the community association.
Thank you. So,
sorry, I should clarify too that also the last one, the last recommendation about parking. So if there is a desire to do more than the bare requirements for the hall project, then staff propose or recommend that be considered as a new project, and that a proposal be brought to the 2022 budget. Thank you.
Okay, so when you referred to those, is that on attachment A or attachment B? Attachment B? You said number 1 and then the last one.
Sorry, I'm referring to when I was making specific reference to recommendations, I was referring to the recommendations as listed on page 132.
Yes.
The cover page of the report.
Yes, and you indicated that number 1 and the last one are included in that. I'm asking, is that attachment A or attachment B?
Both of the attachments would include reference to the operating plan. That is, the implications of that are assessed in on page 135. So that's the front page of attachment A. And then the corresponding recommendation is numbered as point 3 on page 141, which attempts to take the implications and transmit them into motions. And in the spirit of completeness, there's motions there for everything. Many of them are noted as status quo. So if we're just carrying on with what has already been directed, there's no need to make a recommendation. So that's why only a handful of the items from attachment B appear back on page 132.
Okay. So we'll, if depending on the outcome of this recommendation on the floor, we will then visit attachment B. Thank you. Director Pratt.
Thanks. So just want to address a couple of things regarding the service and the current funds. So starting with the funds, the Half Moon Bay Community Association has put an incredible amount of effort into continuing to increase their contribution. The last number I saw was, I believe, 358,000, and their goal for 2021 is 400,000. And I know that there's been a bit of a lull in the donations just because of the uncertainty that's happening here at the board on the uncertainty of the project moving forward. In that way, they've been really working hard, well, and then also with COVID too. But I know they're highly committed to privately through their organization to continue to raise funds for any shortfall to help reduce that taxation concern for at least the initial capital costs. They've also are working really hard with staff to, and it'll depend on board direction about how to create an operating agreement, a memorandum between the SCRD and the Community Association for the ongoing maintenance and operations of the hall. In regards to this being located in Area B and recreation being in areas, you know, we have an arena in Gibsons and an arena in Seychelles that we pay into regionally, and there's no card. You don't get carded at the door to see where you live. So, you know, it is going to be a facility that's open to all people of the Sunshine Coast and or outside the Sunshine Coast, because I know currently it's or prior pandemic prior, it was being used for weddings for people off coast or events of any kind. It is, you know, I hear the concerns that have been raised about the size and the scope. We don't have many places on the coast that can have this size of place or of gathering place as we move forward. And as we grow, we continue to get busier. We've seen a blip with COVID, and that will continue to it probably have some implications, but this is a regional service. It's going to be a regional facility based on board direction about unpicking things out. And Pender Harbor may fund its own pool, but it was set up differently from the get-go. This is unpacking a situation that that's already been in place since its inception. So it certainly, if the majority of the directors want to go that route in unpacking, that's what I'm sure staff will do. But if we're looking at things regionally and how we work together as a coast, it's going to be a regional facility. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. I am in general support of the recommendations, and as noted, regional facility. The federal government says we want to support you, we want to give some money, so lining up with the federal government. And staff has brought a bunch of the information about how this is going to move forward, particularly the operating thing with the agreement with the community association. So I think for the most part, most of the questions that I have are in the plan to get answered. You know, the worst concern I have is the sunk cost. That we go down here another year and we drop 400 grand into it and go, yeah, that's it. But you know, that's part of the process. We've gone through other sunk costs. So, but the community wants it. They're doing a strong aspect of raising money. We're all in it together, I think. The more we're all in it together, economies of scale is what regional districts are about. And the splitting up of services, generically, it's called the balkanization of services in the islands. They want to take us out of everything that I am not a participant, I'm not a user of. And I think it weakens the regional district when we go down that way. So that's where I am.
Thank you. Director Ties.
Yeah, I just want to comment on the amazing fundraising efforts that Area B has undergone, and I think that's amazing. If we take those $400,000 and the 70% that would then be raised by the grant, we get to about $1.3 million, which, if looking at what I would see as a community hall, I think is a reasonable price to be paying for a community hall. A $3 million plus, it's probably going to end up costing closer to $4 million now with the COVID pricing and all such things. I just don't see why the rest of the coast should have to pay to put this absolutely massive structure. Well, it's actually not that massive. It's just overpriced, in my opinion. There, so I do have real concerns, especially around the price per square foot and the location of it. And I think a more modest building in a different location, I'd be more than happy to support as a joint function. But yeah, I have a really hard time justifying this project and this location at this price to my taxpayers. I'll just be honest about that.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yep, I'm just going to reiterate that we have no policy and no strategy around community halls. We have acquired them sort of willy-nilly. Two or three of them were purpose-built. 2 of them were acquired. Incidentally, the existing Cooper's Green Hall is a lovely, lovely little hall. Great location and everything. But, just building projects one-off because somebody wants this project is not a great way to approach asset management. And I will also add that the regional district doesn't have the best track record in managing large capital projects like, say, the Seashell Pool. So I can't support this at this time. Thanks.
Thank you. There are no further hands up. This is voting A, B, D, E, and F, and there are recommendations on the floor as on page 132. So last call. All right. Voting rural areas again, as I said, all those in favor of the recommendation? Right, and all those opposed? Would you like that recorded? Okay, motion is passed. Moving on then to attachment B. On page 141. So there are some decisions to be made here with regards to some of the options. So for number 1, status quo recommendation, that is the motion that staff are currently operating under. So if there's a change to be made, we would need to make another recommendation. I don't know if we have sufficient information at this point to do that, but Director Ties.
I just wanted to comment that if we were to go towards net zero, I think the HVAC issue would solve itself, because in order to have a net zero building, you need to have a good HVAC system. And so I think it's sort of a 2 birds with 1 stone. thing. Overall, I don't see any issues with the path that that staff is going down.
All right. So number 3 has already been passed. Number 4 is the item around net zero. If we do nothing, it will stay as with a focus on carbon-free energy efficiency. Director McMahon?
I feel that we need to aim for net zero.
Director Ties?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I am not in favor of, of what staff's going down. Yes, I'm with Director McMahon there.
All right, so there is a recommendation for B. Director McMahon?
Did I move recommendation 4B?
You can move recommendation 4B, yes, and that's been seconded. Any questions or comments? Director Pratt? Oh, can we go to GM Hall first? Sorry.
Oh, okay, because my question would have to be answered by him anyways.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director. So staff would note that in order to act on this recommendation, a further amendment to the design contract would be recommended. And so I look back at the analysis on page 136 that suggests that the incremental design cost is probably in the order of $15,000. Thanks.
So that would be on top of the 263,299 that we just passed?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Director Pratt.
Yeah, that was my question for staff, was about the implications of net zero in terms of cost and scope. So.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Yes, I actually, little further question. I understand the 15K in design. Any estimate to the effects on the total project?
Not at this time. And staff would be, just want to point out, we're talking about readiness, not net zero performance. Thank you.
Does that mean that it's in the range of tens of thousands rather than hundreds of thousands?
We need to work further into the design to make a comment on that. Thanks.
Director Lee?
So it's good. I think my question was answered.
Okay, thank you. Director McMahon?
Yeah, it is a complex question because there could be lower long-term operating costs, right, for a net zero building. So the upfront investment might be very, very worthwhile in the long term. We want to create, if we're going to build this thing, we want to build the best building possible and get the maximum value for the taxpayer in the long run.
All right, before we take this to vote, what I'd like to do is go through the rest of these, craft the recommendation, the additional dollars that potentially that shows. We'll add those up and then we will have the final recommendation. All right, Director Pratt?
I was just going to say, just a point of order. We do technically have we have a motion already on the floor.
We do.
Yeah. So.
Right. Yes, I understand. And what I'm saying is there are others here that may have additional financial implications. Do we want to do each of the pieces and then do one with the recommendation for the financial piece at the end? Or do we want to, I guess we could, okay. We can vote on them individually and then add the dollar amount at the end. That works. All right, Director Lee, to the motion on the floor?
Yes, it was actually a point of order. I don't believe that we're allowed to have multiple motions pending on the floor.
Yes.
So if we were to review these other ones, we would be looking at them for information only. rather than a motion, so we probably wouldn't know what our cost was anyways.
All right, thank you. So we have a recommendation on the floor that, hang on, let me get back to there, that the design brief for the Cooper's Green Hall replacement project be amended to include net zero readiness as a requirement, and that the project budget allowance for architectural fees be amended to reflect the change. Do we want the 15,000 now then, or do we look at the end and add in the additional funds? I guess that would be to staff. How would you like me to just move this forward? So we don't know what number. I mean, I don't want to do 15,000 and then 5,000 and then 10,000 if we're going to do all of them, is kind of what I'm getting at.
Can we
Director McMahon?
Can we just not amend the motion on the floor as we go?
We can. You want to add the 15,000 in here is what you're saying?
Can we just call the question on this and vote on each one separately? Because it'll simplify things. Their staff is taking copious notes. There is a recording on this, and so that it's just clear that we're voting on each one separately.
All right, we have a recommendation on the floor. This is voting again, A, B, D, E, and F. All those in favor of the recommendation? All right, that passes. Looking to item number 5, updated cost estimate. Status quo is that an updated project cost estimate, including revised consultant fees, be prepared prior to tender, and that's regular business practice, so there's no motion required. The other option is that an updated project cost estimate be prepared following the preparation of construction drawings. Director McMahon.
Yeah, given the inflation and construction costs going on right now, is that a prudent move, or looking for a little advice here?
Staff?
Unique times. So my answer at the present time is yes, it would be a prudent move. More information is not unhelpful in a peculiar environment. Thanks.
Thank you. So directors, direction on this one. Director Lee.
An extra cost for doing this, because it looks like we're going to be doing updated project costs. Is it only twice? So I'd be interested to know what the value of this would be if we went with option B.
Thanks for the question. So currently our contract with our consultant would include one more cost estimate. This would add in another data point along the way, and the value would come from the ability to make some design considerations in the final offing prior to getting ready for tender. Thanks.
Good, thank you.
All right, directors, would you like to move this forward or not, or do we stay with the status quo? Director Lee?
I'd like to make a motion to go with option B on item 5 on page 141.
So that an updated project cost be prepared following the preparation of construction drawings, and that's been seconded.
Yes.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Director Hiltz?
So this is the $3,000 piece. We're doing motions, and that's how I read that. This is a value of 3 in increasing the contract.
GM Hall?
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
Thank you. So all those in favor of the recommendation on the floor? Thank you, that passes. Number 6, now this could be separate, or it could be included here when we're moving this project forward. Director Pratt.
I was just going to say this has already been taken care of in the recommendations on page 132 in the and further that. a new
Yes,
project to
correct.
enhance
You're
park.
correct.
Yes, yeah. So we already support that.
Okay, number 7 is already status quo. Number 8, we have 2 separate directions. One can be undertaken administratively, or that a business case for the Cooper's Green Hall replacement project be prepared and brought to a future committee meeting. Director McMahon.
Yeah, we're getting things a bit backwards. You know, we really should start with a business case before we have a project. So I don't know what the point is at this point. If folks are anxious to go ahead with this, regardless of whether it makes any sense as a business case, then why do a business case?
Okay, Director Hiltz.
Financial sustainability policy says if you're going to do an enhanced service, you do a business case. So I think we should do it. I don't know how much it's cost. It wasn't costed out. But if we're not quite in order, I think we should still do it. It would help the accountability in terms of voting, that there is a business case and it isn't just opinion, I suppose. It moves it beyond opinion.
Thank you. Director Pratt.
So, unless I'm missing something, staff will be able to answer this because they have a longer history with this than I do. So when the Cooper's Green project started, it started off as a park management plan. And so this is prior to my tenure. And there was a lot of community consultation, and there was a task force group. And so I would look to GM Hall as, was the business case scenario ever contemplated as part of that process already? Or is there a document that may already be somewhere that, because I know it started off as a park management plan, and this was one of the high priorities, was replacing the hall. The task force started with the previous board. That's my wondering, I guess.
Thank you for the question. I think I follow the line, Director. So during the initial design concept phase, analysis of the past use of the hall and a projection into what that might mean for sustainable operation of a future hall was completed. So a business case from the perspective of, can this hall sustainably be operated, was undertaken. Yes. There's the bigger question of what's the business case for investing in parks and community spaces, and that's beyond the scope of this specific project. I think what staff have tried to communicate in the tables, in the attachments here, is that reviewing, refreshing, and confirming the business analysis that was done at the time that this project took shape will naturally form part of the operating plan, because along with our community partner, we're very interested in the financial sustainability of the facility. And so that's in scope already. And from staff's perspective, further direction isn't required to take action on that. Thank you.
So just remember, all of these points that are in here came out of the last conversation we had. So that's why staff are just bringing these back to us. Director Toth.
Thank you, Chair. Ultimately, GM Hall touched on pretty much everything I had been thinking about this. I just wanted to point out that if we were going to ask for a separate business case, it is pointed out on page 138 that there could be staff resources required to be diverted from other projects. So if staff are already looking at a business case lens when they proceed forward with this. That's something the rural directors should consider too. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see Director Hiltz.
So I'm kind of hearing that we wouldn't get a lot out of a business case. Is this, we've got enough, staff has enough information now? Is that how I understand it? We got enough now. We wouldn't really get more from a business case.
I would agree with you, Director. The committee can expect an operating plan that I have I have confidence will address the operating sustainability of the facility. Thanks.
Thank you. CAO?
I was just going to add and would probably go a long way, Director Hiltz, to addressing sort of the transparency and accountability around the operating plan and business case nature of the project.
So see no appetite to move that one forward. Number 9 is a separate topic that has come up a number of times, that a capital asset acquisition policy be discussed as part of a future strategic plan review process. Director McMahon.
My understanding is that asset management plans are underway for recreation facilities, our existing facilities. Is that the case?
GM Hall?
With a slight correction that this is part of the Park Service, and that we already have asset management plans for our rec facilities. Yes, we are. There's active work on an asset management plan for parks.
And are we anticipating an update of our regional recreation plan, which covers parks, I'm pretty sure?
Interesting question. So just for clarity, we're talking about the master plan. That is something that staff have been considering in light of recent board directives and with the fresh eyes of a new GM, but it's not currently budgeted. It's not currently in a work plan. Thanks.
Okay, the other piece that was mentioned in another report, in response to another report recently, was that asset management is not the same as asset acquisition. So this is talking about capital asset acquisition policy, not capital asset management. Director McMahon.
Yes, there's a lot of different pieces here that need to be considered. Like, we do not have a parks acquisition policy, and we should have one. And we don't have a policy around community halls, and we really should have one. So there's enough pieces moving out there that I think we should put this to one side right now and look at it another time. Would that make sense?
Fire halls is another piece in this, right? Capital asset. So I think maybe it's a note to staff that this is something that we want to revisit, just not now. Okay. Number 10 is covered off. This is something that we normally will do. COVID-19 HVAC review. According to Director Ties, this would probably be covered off in the net zero readiness. Maybe, maybe not. So the project, the recommendation right now is that it continue on the basis of BC Building Code requirements. The option is that the scope be increased to include a review of HVAC design opportunities to reduce the spread of COVID-19. Directors? Director McMahon.
I have been expecting that there might be leadership from senior government on this issue coming down the road. And since I think we could leave it right now and wait to see if building code changes come.
Director Ties?
Yeah, my previous statement was just based on that a net zero building needs to be airtight, and in order to have an airtight building, you need a pretty solid HVAC option installed. So I'm happy to leave it where it is right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Number 12 is covered off. No, sorry, it's beyond the scope of Cooper's Green Hall project. So is this another one that this ties into the previous one we talked about with where we're talking about the capital asset acquisition. This sort of ties into there to make sure we've got financial sustainability and cost recovery. So again, something not to visit at this time. Okay, sounds good. Number 13 can be undertaken administratively, so no motion required. And number 14, it's beyond the scope of the Cooper's Green Hall project again. And this is to do with all of community halls. Director McMahon.
Is there also underway any review of our fees and charges for recreation?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so we've been through all of these and made decisions. And at this point, by my calculations, we would need to make a recommendation to increase the budget for the consultants by an additional $18,000. Is that correct, GM Hall?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Would one of the directors in the function like to make that recommendation? Moved by Director Pratt. Is there a seconder? Seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Oh, we're all in favor? Perfect. Thank you very much. We are finished with this item. Moving on to item number 10, Seashell. Oh, we have all the fun today. Seashell Aquatic Center Temporary Fire Protection System. And this is was the additional material that came to us. So look to staff to speak to this. Ms. Gagnon.
Certainly. I was going to say good morning, but good afternoon, actually.
Yes.
This report that is presented to you today is, I just want to draw your attention, it's specifically to deal with financing for the temporary fire protection system that needs to go in at the Seashell Aquatic Center. And the system serves as an interim measure until the sprinkler system itself can be replaced. So as the board will recall, on June 10th, you passed a resolution to replace the sprinkler system over 3 years. So in order for the facility to remain open as an extra measure of protection for the building, this temporary fire system needs to be installed. And the previous budget that had been approved for the project does not include this temporary fire system. So administration is recommending to the board that you approve a financial plan amendment that would fund the estimated expense of the fire protection system at $154,000 as per option 1 that's been presented. And if the funding is approved, staff can move forward with tendering this piece of the project for installation in the late summer, and that at a subsequent report would come forward at a later date to deal with the sprinkler system replacement. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Director McMahon and then Director Tice.
Right. I'd like to thank staff for all the extra work they've had to put in on this file. And the extra work after we freaked out at the prospect of $708,000 for the sprinkler system. And I support option number 1. So I would be happy to move the recommendations on page 143A.
And that's been seconded. Thank you. Director Tice.
Yeah, my question is there a resale value of this temporary system after it's been used? I would hope that we might be able to get some money back for it if we don't need it anymore.
Go ahead.
Sorry, just having mute issues here. Thank you for the question. I will note that there is part of this system that will remain permanently in the building, and that's part of the fire alarm system. The heat detection is a linear heat detection system that's actually a cabling that's installed right on top of the current sprinkler system that detects the heat, which is the temporary piece. The question about whether those cabling could be repurposed, resold, I actually don't know the answer, but certainly as part of a disposition, we would look at that, but I'm not sure. I'd have to work with a contractor around that.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm interested in the difference between option 1 and option 3 and staff's perspective on option 1 having the flexibility. And versus the balance of depleting the limited reserves. So so it's essentially operating reserves or gas tax. And gas tax is a much bigger pot. Is there overhead in doing this? It's like a first time to do this. I'm going, why deplete reserves when there's another pot to pull it out of? And where does the flexibility coming in? Like, what's the advantage of option 1 over option 3?
I would say option 3, and Tina will probably point to this, is that this function is something that the municipalities contribute to, but if you're using gas tax funds, there's no contribution from the municipalities for that. Tina?
Well, essentially, it was recognition that this was definitely would be new territory for the regional district to go ahead and allocate gas tax from that has been traditionally allocated to the rural areas to a regional service. So we've put it forward for consideration. There's a comment in the note that all 3 options, obviously there's other options other than the 3. I think these were the ones that staff felt would have the least impact to taxpayers. So most certainly all 3 options can be considered for consideration. It just means there may need to be some understanding from the other rural areas as to what their impacts to their gas tax allocation would be if this was chosen, but there is a note in the report to that effect.
Thank you. Director Hiltz, follow up?
Just the flexibility. Why does option 1 provide more flexibility?
I think because there's just less administration. Mind you, the 3rd option or the 2nd option from the gas tax, we would just have to do more reporting. We might have to check in with UBCM just to ensure that the components there were, indeed eligible. But I don't foresee there being an issue with that. But there's just a little more administrative overhead.
But in terms of delivering the project, the money is the money, essentially.
Essentially.
Thank you. Director Lee and then Director Toth.
Thank you. Looking at this, I was just wondering, is there any increase in operations costs? Because typically when you put in different infrastructure, more infrastructure, you end up with more staff time. And I didn't see any mention of that in this one.
Thank you for the question. No, we do not anticipate any additional operating costs at this point in time.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Toth.
Thank you, Chair. I'm hesitant to deplete operational reserves, but I recognize that, at this time, we don't have a way for Gibsons and Seashell to contribute to this through, gas tax allocations. So I didn't want to sign the rural areas up for something that I wasn't able to contribute to. In the future, I hope that we have a means by which Seashell and Gibsons can contribute to gas tax funded projects appropriately. But I think in terms of getting this thing moving and going and happening now, because of the timeliness of it, I think option 1's really the only way that's equitable to everybody.
All right, so I have a question, seeing no other hands up. How does this impact our keeping the facility open? Because there is a concern, there was a concern expressed by the fire department that we need to address the issues at this facility. Given we are now going to be going out to tender, we don't know when this project will actually commence, does that impact the facility operations?
Thank you for that question. It's a great one. We have and are in continuous conversation with the fire department around the safety, and obviously safety of the building and the people in the building are of utmost importance to us. So it is our understanding that the fire department is satisfied with the course of action that we are proposing today.
Thank you. All right, seeing no further questions, we have recommendations on the floor as on page 143A. Oh, Director Beamish.
Sorry for the late question, but apropos of what Director Toth was talking about, you know, if the SCRD were to approach the town of Gibsons and the Dixon Seashell for a comparable contribution from Safe Restart funds, I think our council might look at that favorably as opposed to using operational reserves. So that if we were asked for $32,000 in Safe Restart funds and to jointly match the SCRD funds, I think that could be an option. But it may be an option to make that request even subsequent to this going through, and then changing the funding structure after that, if the council's approving.
Tina?
That motion most certainly can be made, and staff can work and send a formal request to the various councils. I would also point out that Seashell Nation SIGD is also a participant in community recreation, so I don't see the representative here below, but most certainly we could if that motion was made.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a recommendation on the floor at this point. All those in favor of the recommendation on the floor? Thank you. Director Beamish, did you want to make another motion?
Yeah, I'd make a motion that the board invite or ask municipal councils, District of Seychelles and the town of Gibsons, to contribute $32,000 each from Safe Restart funds towards this project, which, if approved, would offset the budget from reserves.
Okay, then that's been seconded. To our CFO's comment, though, we have another government that is part of this who also pay in. Do we also want them included in that or not?
Did they get Safe Restart funds?
Yes, they did.
Well, I would certainly include them in that, and the proportional share of that $64,000 if we can all come up with that cost. I'd be certainly contribute to that. So maybe that divides it by 3 instead of by 2.
Okay, so how would you like to make an amendment to the recommendation?
That the town of Gibsons, District of Seychelles, and SIGD be asked to contribute a proportional share of Safe Restart funds to offset the $64,000 of operational reserves proposed, approved for this budget.
Okay, and that's been seconded. Now, yes, Chair Pratt.
Can you repeat how that recommendation is? Because I think I have a concern, but I just need to hear the wording of it.
Thank you. Tara?
And can somebody mute themselves, please?
Yeah,
there's a lot of background noise.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Recommended that the Sunshine Coast Regional District Board invite the municipal councils, District of Seychelles, Town of Gibsons, and SIGD to contribute an equal share from their COVID-19 Safe Restart funds to offset the budget from the SCRD operating reserves.
I think it's proportional share is what was indicated.
Oh.
Rather than equal share, proportional share. Director Pratt?
I'm considering this because it's I was worried that we were getting close to demanding or directing other municipal councils to give us money, but it is a request or an encouragement, maybe. A little on the fence with it. I would appreciate it completely. The other governments that are part of the function to do that. However, in wording it and requesting it, it's a bit awkward, but happy to hear other comments.
We don't have any issue saying no. I mean, honestly, at this point, I know that our staff are looking at other projects that they may have allocated funds to, and they would have to come to us and say, yes, we have it, or no, we don't have it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
So,
yeah, and proportionately, the regional district received a lot less funding than the, on when we're looking at it that way. So I'm more than happy to assist with any COVID-19 restart funds that the municipalities may wish to offer. It was totally, that way. And same with the sprinkler system as we're going through the whole project. So I think at the end of the day, I'm okay with it.
Okay. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I'm fine with it too. And if you consider that almost exactly half of the population is rural and half is municipal, then 64-64 is pretty close to equitable.
I do know that our chief financial officer will want to ensure that the COVID fund, this is an acceptable use of COVID funds, right? That's always bottom line, but I know Tina will ensure that works. All right, so this is voting areas B, D, E, F, District of Sechelt, SIGD, and Town of Gibsons. All those in favor? Thank you. Moving on, communications. We have a letter from the Sechelt Indian Government District in support of a grant application that has gone in from the SCRD for some funds. We thank them for the letter. And then the second one is with regards to Municipal Affairs Statutes Amendment Act 2021. So there are two components to this. One is with regards to electronic meetings, but the other big change that impacts the regional district is with regards to mail-in ballots. So, corporate officer, would you be willing to say just a few words about the mail-in ballot impact?
Sure. So we're still waiting to see the final wording of how the legislation will be updated, but we're just anticipating that the province will broaden our ability to extend mail ballots to more of the residents during elections. So in previous elections, we had to limit it to those who were considered remote from the regional district or for reasons of illness could not appear in person to cast a ballot. So we just anticipate that to be broadened significantly. I'm not sure if it will be everyone, but we're waiting to see.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from directors? Director Hills.
Yeah, interesting. The mail-in ballot in the next election, budget implications. Maybe I would prefer to mail it in rather than going in person. So, what would be it's early at this point. So will something be coming in the future in terms of the cost of running elections?
Do you want me to? Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Absolutely. And I think that it doesn't preclude our obligation to still provide full in-person voting opportunities for everyone in the regional district. So what I would expect is possibly less people casting ballots in person and some of those people now mailing them in, but that would all be part of an election budget that'll come forward in 2022.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions or comments and no new business, I'd look for a motion to move in camera under section 91 F and K of the Community Charter. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And we have no attendees left. Were there any questions emailed into us? No questions. Thank you. All right. Does anybody need a break to get themselves something to drink and secure their location? Has everybody secured their location? Yes. Okay. Director Lee, are your headphones working?
How about I'll count us down?
Well, I don't know. Is he good? Are we ready? Can you count us down to live then? If you're ready to go live?
Going live in 5, 4, 3.
Thank you. Welcome back to the Corporate Administrative Services Committee meeting of Thursday, June 24th. We are at the end of our meeting. I would look for a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Sherry. See you shortly.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Bye-bye.